Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Thursday, January 20th, 2022, and today I'll be sharing more true ghost stories from the web. You can find all the episodes as well as links to social media and ways to donate and other ways to contact me with comments or questions about episodes or topic suggestions or stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others. You can find all of that at salcedoparanormal.podbean.com. I'm always looking for any feedback from listeners, and especially when it comes to stories I can read on the show. Or if you are able to use Discord and you would like to share your stories on a show at some point, you can also find me through those ways to contact me, and we can arrange an interview episode. I know there are other ways to do interviews, but Discord is just the easiest for me, and I know it can take a little while to get used to, but I think once you do, you'll find it's not too bad. Hopefully, anyway. So yeah, always looking for true stories of experiences with the paranormal. I'm more aware of ghost-like stories or ghost-like experiences, but I'm always looking for any stories of experiences, just as long as they're not too graphic or anything like that. I try to keep this mainly a family-friendly show. And yeah, I think that covers everything. So I will get to the stories here. So let's see here. Okay, so this one says, I don't remember how old I was, but I wasn't over 15 at the time. I think I was 13. I'm not sure. I never had a great relationship with my youngest brother. He's 2 years younger than me. But one night we were sitting on the grass across the street from my mom's house. In front of us was the highway and nothing else. On this green area, in between the street and the highway, were some trees and some light poles, although half of them didn't work. I remember I was sitting there with my brother, having a nice conversation, which wasn't that usual. And out of the blue, I felt that somebody was looking at me. So I turned to my right, and there he was, in the darkness, under a tree. I saw a man. He was wearing brown pants and a red shirt. There was something about the way he looked at us that terrified me. I told my brother, "Don't look, but there is a man under the tree, and he is looking at us." He tried to act cool, and in the most discreet way he could find, he turned to that direction, but then he just stood looking that way. He got me nervous. "Don't look," I said. "No one's there," he said. I thought maybe I mistook the tree for a man, so I looked with confidence, and there he was, still looking at us. And by then, he noticed we were looking at him, too. I didn't recognize him. It wasn't any of the neighbors. I told my brother that he was there, under the tree, wearing a red shirt, looking at us. By this time, my brother was starting to sound angry. He told me I was crazy. He didn't care anymore. He looked and pointed at the tree. No one's there. I couldn't keep my head up because every time I looked, the man was there. This is when things got interesting. My mom used to have this cat. She was the sweetest cat in the world, and she was a lap cat, a people cat. She loved to be held and pet, and she loved us. The cat came running out of the house. She stopped in the middle of the street, looked at the direction where the man was standing, and growled. Her fur got pointy. I guess it means it stood up. And they mean it stood up. And she looked ready to attack. She then ran back to the house, stopped in the middle of the yard, and did that aggressive thing again. My brother and I looked at each other, got up, and ran inside the house too. To this day, if you ask my brother about that night, he will say that he didn't see a man, but he saw the cat. And those kind of stories are always interesting in a way, because you get confirmation that way that something was going on. So, and when you have an animal acting that way, I think that's interesting. Don't know what the deal was with that. If the writer just was more sensitive. Seems like that's possible. But interesting experience there. I'm glad that was only a one-time thing. But yeah, I don't know. It makes you wonder who or what that was. If it was a spirit or if it was some other kind of being. Just looking like a person. Hard to say, obviously, but the cat obviously sensed something there too. So anyway, I'm going to the next story here. This one says, I remember my stepdad telling me this story about his friend, so the whole thing is kind of blurry, but I still think it's pretty scary. My stepdad's friend was at a work party at this old bar in the town in British Columbia, Canada. I'm pretty sure it's torn down now. And his friend was told to get another table from the dance floor room in the back of the bar. My stepdad showed me a picture of the room his friend showed him, and this dance floor was full of dusty and old furniture, and a dance floor with a disco ball up, I guess, in the ceiling too, with a stage and all. Pretty neat room, thinking back at it, but nonetheless it was creepy due to how dark some of the corners were, and just how dark it got without lights. My stepdad's friend went into this room when it was pitch black, but he left the door open to get some of the other room's light so he could see. He grabbed a table, but he looked towards the dance floor and saw two black figures, I'm guessing they mean shadow figures, dancing. Obviously scared him, and he ran out of the room and left the work party without looking back or telling anyone why, I guess until years later. Overall, pretty scary to think about, just to see two pure black figures you can just see moving around. And that is odd. I wonder if that's more of a residual thing. If figures didn't seem to react to the person that went in there. I think that could be. Although that's but if you think about it, I mean, if that room ever was in use, which I would think it would have been at some point, maybe when the bar first opened. If it was a popular enough place, that's a lot of energy people use and give off when they're, I would think when they're enjoying themselves or dancing and whatever. So very interesting that was seen there. But makes me wonder about if we could find that location and go back into the history of it. They don't say in the article, and um, which is okay with me. I like to keep these stories somewhat vague, just so that people can have their privacy, and just because to me the experience is more interesting than the place. But still, sometimes with stories like that, I wonder about other activity that could have happened there, and or just the history of that place. So, but yeah, interesting story there. All right. So I'll go on to the next one. This one says. This one says, for context, I live in a farmhouse on a plot of land that has been passed down through the family for 3 generations. The farm consists of a barn, a garage, and the refurbished house. The barn is 3 stories tall, with one main room and 2 small stalls on the side. Above the stalls is the loft area. Takes a ladder to get up there, but as a child, I'd climb up the stall doors. That doesn't sound dangerous, but all right. Uh, One day, my brother and I were walking by the barn door to get to the wood pile. We heard a very faint sound of a train whistle. Confused, we went in the barn where the sound got louder. It sounded like the typical whistle of a train. It was coming from the loft. We climbed up and located the sound under a tall pile of old boards. Digging through, the sound got louder and louder. That's when we discovered a wooden crate full of old trains that my dad later explained had belonged to my grandpa. He had died on the property and loved trains while he was alive. As soon as we went to take the cover off the crate, the sound stopped. We looked over the trains. They were from way before small batteries existed. When you used to plug the set into a power source, and the rails had little conductors that kept the train going. There was no way they could have come on without power. We weren't scared. We knew it was Grandpa coming to visit. It brought us both a warm and comforting feeling. And that's really interesting. It's like, I mean, however that worked. But yeah, it's makes you think maybe it was the grandpa, and leading them to that. It's possible. Um, it's just interesting that the thing that I heard. I don't know. I just really wonder how loud those engines were when they were plugged in. If they could have even made that much sound to go all the way out and down onto another level and basically outside, um, so that the kids could hear it. That's really interesting. But yeah, that's sounds like someone, and possibly the grandpa, was trying to get their attention and lead them to that toy set there. So it's one of those stories that's nice rather than too scary, I think. So they didn't seem scared, so that's the main thing too. Let's see here. So I'll go on to the next story and I'll go from there. This one says, my mom told me a story about when she was doing laundry in our basement about 4 years ago. Her room was across from the laundry room. Anyway, her boyfriend went to the store to get food, and she was home alone. But from the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a plaid shirt leap into the room like Mario, which is interesting. That's a reference to video games, in case anyone doesn't know. Um, says then she called her boyfriend's name, sorry, and nothing replied. Once he got home, she told him about it, and he said, "Are you telling me we live with a ghost?" In a joking way. Then the light flickered in the room at that very moment he said that. He's not a spiritual man, but that definitely changed his mind about spirits. And timing like that is always interesting. It seems like they maybe, or whatever is there, might have been listening and wanted to respond and did it through the light, basically saying, "Yeah, that's what she's saying." So, um, I'm very lucky. Overall, I can't remember the last time I had a light really flicker. There've been a couple times in this apartment where I could have swore I turned a light. I was sure I turned the light off and it was on, and including the light switch, just once in a while here and there. But it's always in the back of my mind. I never really talk much about that because it's only happened a couple times, and I always wonder if somehow I forgot to turn the light off. This was kind of before I started getting more sensitive to light too, so I could have left the light on. But it's still weird though because I feel like I normally turn them off when I'm not using them, even before that started. So, but of course, there can be issues with lights. So, but still, those two things together, that was an interesting story. It's kind of funny whenever I think of Super Mario, any of the early Mario games. Think of my cat, Logan, because when she was little, just a kitten, I used to play those games more, and I used to have a big TV. Well, not huge TV, but like big as in it was an older model, so it had it was like box shaped, and she would sit on top of that TV and even lay on top of it sometimes. When I used to play, every once in a while, she'd be up there and she'd look down at the TV, and while I was playing, and she'd try to paw at the moving objects on the screen. And so whenever I noticed she was there, I'd make and make Mario jump all around and get her to try to paw at it. It was just interesting. So, but anyway, so yeah, lights are an interesting thing. I do think they can be manipulated. Timing, like I said, on that one is really interesting. But then I know they can malfunction. But even then, the timing of that is just really funny in a way. So yeah, I'll that's it for that one. And now these last two stories I forgot to go through and edit them for spelling and grammar, so this should be interesting. You never know. But anyway, we'll get through them. This one says, I had been to the Gettysburg battlefield many times and had always heard great ghost stories about the place. But I had never had a similar experience. And I was getting increasingly suspicious that these stories might be fictional. I'm just going to interject there and say I don't know. I feel like, as always, there's a mix. There's probably some that could be, and then I'm sure there's plenty that aren't. Just had to throw it in there because it's one of those hot spots. Anyway, so this says, nevertheless, finding myself in Gettysburg one evening, I decided to drive around the battlefield and see if my ghost hunting luck might improve. It says, it was a good night for this activity, being clear and warm with a near full moon, providing a lot of light. As I drove towards Culp's Hill, where the organized ghost tours never seemed to go, I drove slowly down the road, with my arm out the window, noting the pale gray monuments that lined the roadway. When, as I rounded a turn, my headlights illuminated a distinctly different monument. This one had a top half that was dark and a lower half of a lighter color, and reminded me of a Union soldier's navy blue coat and light blue trousers. Then, as I got closer, it actually turned to face my car. That's when I saw that it actually was a navy blue coat and light blue trousers. Completely three-dimensional, but with no visible person inside the clothing. There seemed to be just a very pale, illuminated oval above the coat collar where a face would be. But nothing else, not even shoes. So the bottom of the trousers didn't reach the ground. As I noted this, it began walking slowly toward the open driver's side window of my car. As it casually walked toward me, with empty sleeves swinging at its sides, and empty pant legs taking step after step without quite touching the ground, my stomach tied itself in knots, and my mind raced through a million thoughts at once. And not just the obvious ones, like, what does it want? What will it do? Why me? No, I also thought those clothes look absolutely real. And the weave of the wool is just like the ones in the museum. And if I could make my hand move, I could touch it and would feel as real as my t-shirt and jeans. Then as I got within inches of the car, one thought broke my paralysis. It's going to climb right through the window, over the top of me, and into the car. That was the motivation I needed to find the accelerator and go. And as I did, the apparition disappeared, as if it had never been there. I raced back to the comfort of streetlights and people in town as fast as I could. But I no sooner got there than I wished I had stayed more rational and maybe tried to communicate with the spirit. Still, this had been the perfect way to convince me of ghosts. It didn't look like any ghost I had ever imagined. Plus, the moonlight was so bright that I could clearly see the details. And with no wires or tree limbs overhead to suspend it, and the bottom of the legs not touching the ground, I couldn't think of any way it could have been faked. I called my wife at home the next morning and told her I officially believe in ghosts. That is quite the experience. That does sound like someone saw something. But yeah, that's really interesting that they didn't see any features of the person, and there was just I guess it'd be a faint light where the head should have been. Yeah, Gettysburg, that's an area known for being active. That's here in the U.S., just in case anyone is unfamiliar with it. It's a major battlefield, and so yeah, I don't blame the person. I've heard that in so many stories where someone sees something and then they react out of fear because it's something they never experienced before, and then after they kind of wish they could have kept it together better and try to communicate, but I think that kind of, I don't know. I think it just takes a while, maybe even several experiences, possibly to get to get past that fear. Not necessarily so you don't have it, but maybe not to act on it right away, so that you can see what else happens. Of course, I'm not sure that it's hard to say that the spirit would have done that because how would they really know? Unless they were conscious and they were aware of this time, how would they know what the car was? Um, but it's still interesting that it appeared to move towards the writer of the story in their car. So and yeah, the whole and that's not uncommon either. The whole thing where people seek just clothes. It's not super common, but it's not really rare either. It does pop up in experiences here and there. But and it sounds like initially the figure was standing completely still, so that the writer thought it was a monument. Um, so yeah, very interesting story there. That's one of those places I'd like to visit someday. Not because I want to be, not so much for just for being scared, but just because I'm interested in history as well as the paranormal, and just to visit a place that much significance and everything, and then that much reported activity, both. Um, I don't normally like to go and kind of looking for all this stuff, but I still kind of would like to visit certain places, and that's one of them. But so I've got one more story here. I didn't get a ton of stories together today, but this will still get us through the half-hour mark, which is always the minimum that I do. So this story says, this isn't a scary or a truly extensive experience, but I just thought it was interesting. Last night I stayed over at a friend's house to watch her little boy while she was in the hospital. I finally got the kid corralled into bed and asleep around 1:30 a.m. and I fell asleep shortly after. At about 2 a.m., I was awoken to the bedroom light flipping on suddenly and the kid crying out, saying he saw someone in the room with us. As alarmed as I should have been, I felt extremely calm. Checked that the bedroom door was still locked and comforted him until he fell back asleep. This morning I found out that my great aunt passed away peacefully in her sleep, and her son found her sometime around 3:30 in the morning. I told my mom about this experience, and she said she and a few other of my family members suddenly woke up around 2 a.m. to their bedroom lights being on as well. I believe she came to visit me shortly after passing to say goodbye. And that I don't doubt in a way, especially when it's several family members, at least a few, having similar experiences around the same time. Um, so I've had my own experiences, a couple of them with family that had passed on after they'd passed on, and so I don't doubt that at all. I just thought that it was interesting that somehow the spirit of the great aunt was able to turn on all the lights in, like I said, like what, 4 or 5 locations, including one where the writer wasn't even at their home. They were at a friend's house. So that's really interesting to me. That they were able to do that. And again, we have the lights. That's kind of funny. It's really interesting. I think I've mentioned this before, but just in case I haven't, and just for new listeners. I a few years ago, before I started this podcast, I called. I asked to submit a story to a podcast, and then eventually I got called by the host of the podcast and did my little interview with them and told my story and everything. And that episode came out, and so I went to visit my dad and my stepmom over at their house and to play that episode for them. It was my first time appearing on any kind of episode like this related to the paranormal. And so I brought my laptop over that I had at the time, and I played another episode where I wasn't on, just for them to get an idea of what the format of the show, which was basically the host would interview a handful of people each episode, and they'd tell their story. And then I played the episode that I was on. And as soon as my voice came from my laptop, the light in the ceiling fan above us turned on. And what was interesting about that is neither my stepmom or dad moved. They were still sitting where they were. And there it wasn't, I found out this after, it wasn't like a really fancy light that had like or a fan that had a remote control, as far as I know. And not only that, but the light did not work. It had not worked from the time that my stepmom moved into that house. She could get the fan to work, but never the light. And it turned on right when my voice started to come from my laptop. And I just thought that someone had turned it on, but then again, like I said, no one had moved. And then I realized, I saw that my dad and stepmom were looking at each other, and they seemed surprised. And they both started talking at once, saying that light never worked. And so they were able to, eventually it turned off on its own, like after several minutes around that time. And yeah, we don't know how to explain it, but we felt like it was my grandma that had passed some years before. And just saying hello, and maybe even just acknowledging that I was on this one podcast. And now, over these years, I feel like maybe that was a message to me, in a way to, hey, do more of that, And I did, and then I appeared on some shows, podcasts, not video, really, just audio shows, and eventually I decided to start this. So it's really interesting. I do believe that family members can visit in different ways, and one of those can be lights. But even if they don't work, and apparently that light, whatever happened with that light, it fixed it. Now it works. The switch and everything works with it. So, really, really interesting that happened. So that last story just made me think of that. It didn't happen right after my grandma had passed, but it was within a couple of years. So, that's gonna do it for tonight. I don't have any more stories as of right now to share. But tomorrow night I will be talking about haunted cemeteries and graveyards. Going over some of those. So, thank you all for listening. And I will talk to you all tomorrow. Have a good night.